Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and you guys know what time it is. Time to talk about current events in the online fitness community, and numerous people, probably at least a dozen people, on my different social media have linked me this video saying, Jason, you're going to have a field day with this one. ScottHermanFitness is promoting the above the knee rack pull again. So you know what, guys? Let me go ahead and put on my +5 hat of Speechcraft, lovingly called my +5 hat of autism by many of you, and let's talk about this. All right, Scott, I want you guys to actually share this with Scott. I want you guys to make sure Scott sees this, because he has commented before in my videos when I discussed and gave him a hard time about the rack pulls before. Because Scott, you basically did address me in there. You said some of these experts, so-called YouTube experts, have said this doesn't work, and they've cited scientific evidence. Well, we need to cite scientific and anecdote here. And Scott, I want you to admit, instead of being so defensive about this, you need to just admit that you're wrong. That not only that it's wrong, but that you're actually damaging people's equipment. This is actually a reckless video for you to promote this exercise. It's reckless. You are hurting gyms. You are damaging equipment. You're going to injure people, and you're doing something that doesn't actually work. You are actually promoting something that doesn't work, either scientifically or anecdotally. And I will prove that to you here in terms of the anecdote. Because we can get into the science in a minute and what experts in physiology, who themselves are jacked and have massive traps, have actually said about this trash exercise, and they've called it a trash exercise. I mean, we could discuss that. I'm going to go out on a limb, though, and say usually someone with a PhD in exercise science who has traps bigger than you and me put together, who says it's a trash exercise and doesn't work, based upon the physiology and biomechanics, you might want to pay attention at that point, right? I mean, that's somebody you should probably pay attention to. Not saying they're guaranteed to be right, but when you look at the anecdote, I train shirtless 3-4 days a week now. You can see my traps clearly, and you said right there and said, well, you know, you pointed out Alpha Destiny as if Alpha Destiny has the most amazing traps in the world. He's got decent sized traps. They're not massive. They're not bigger than mine. Interestingly enough, he trained shirtless with Omar Issoff. Were his traps any bigger than Omar's? No. His traps are not bigger than anybody who can deadlift and overhead press as much as he can or more. Omar and I represent people who can at least equal or surpass his deadlifts and overhead presses. Coincidentally, his traps are no bigger than either of ours. They're not. So if you're going to talk about anecdote and point that out, look at the people you can compare him to right there. His traps aren't any bigger. You're doing the above the knee rack pulls and have been promoting them for over a year now. You don't have big traps. So let's kind of come over to the point. Maybe they don't work that well. Have you considered that maybe they were just a gimmick that Alpha Destiny put out, that it was just a gimmicky exercise that he did to make money, and that it doesn't actually work because he is the only person, and you're like the second person to promote it, and it's not working for you? Did you look at the other stuff that he does? If you look at the other lifts that he does, if you look at how strong he is on weighted pull-ups, you don't think weighted pull-ups work your traps? You look at how much weight he rows, you don't think that works your traps? The guy can standing press over 200 pounds. What does the scientific data say about the standing barbell press and trapezius activation in EMG studies? It's insanely high. You don't think all these other lifts contributed to his traps? You really think it's the above the knee rack pulls? Do you really think that? I mean, let's be realistic here. How absurd and ludicrous is it to claim that, when you can see, based upon the physiology of all these other lifts and what they do in his lifts, that's where he got his traps. And his traps are the same size as everybody else who can lift the same amount of weight he can. He can overhead press about 200 pounds. He can deadlift about 500 pounds. Every single other lifter in the entire world, just about, who can hit those same lifts has traps the same size as him, without doing above the knee rack pulls. I mean, really, let's be realistic here. That's a fact, and you can observe it anywhere. And let's come over to the other fact. All these people who did the above the knee rack pulls and have been training them on camera and talk about how their traps blew up, none of them have traps. Scott, you don't have traps. It's not working. It's a garbage exercise. Then look at what Dr. Mike Israetel has said, it doesn't work. He said, no, it doesn't work. Well, he has been a competitive bodybuilder, a competitive power lifter. Besides being a professor of kinesiology and a coach who actually makes a good living coaching, he also competes now in BJJ. I mean, he's pretty well-rounded athlete, coach, and professor in the area of kinesiology. He's even said, no, it doesn't actually work the traps that effectively. But what it does do is create an enormous amount of fatigue. From a training response to a fatigue ratio, it's a terrible exercise. And I mean, if we're going to talk about training programming and we're going to talk about maximizing the amount of workload that you can do relative to the fatigue you generate, it doesn't work in any sort of structured training. It's actually a really bad choice of exercises. And what I mean is, even if it could equal the shrug, for example, and it can't, but even if it could, the fatigue exceeds it. Therefore, it's an inferior exercise to throw in. Nobody has ever had problems getting big traps with shrugs. And you sit there, you're talking about really, really weak numbers. You're like, well, okay, so you can do shrugs with 225. Well, that's why you have small traps, because you're using 225. I mean, that's like saying, oh, you can bench 225 for a few reps. Why don't you have a massive chest? I don't know, maybe you should get your bench up to 300 for reps. That would probably help. Just saying. Like if you have 225 for reps strength on a shrug, you're going to have 225 for rep size traps. Do you know anybody with massive traps who can only do shrugs with 225? Or do they all do shrugs with 315, 405, 500, 600? Right? Everybody with really massive traps who uses shrugs for is their choice of exercises, they can shrug a hell of a lot of weight, not 225, not 275. Okay, be realistic here. And as far as the stretch you're talking about, there's no evidence that stretch overload is particularly effective for hypertrophy. I'm not saying it can't generate some, but it's not that effective. It just isn't. And you're losing the isometric of a deadlift by even doing it that way. There's an isometric contraction involved with the deadlift of your whole mid-trap that you're losing by doing the above-the-knee rack pull. It's just, from a fatigue versus stimulus ratio, is a horrifically bad exercise. It is one of the worst exercises ever invented. Every expert agrees on that. And the person that Alpha Destiny got the idea from, Eric Bugenhagen, who was his hero, came out later and said, actually, it's not even that good of an exercise for traps. The guy who he got it from has said that it's really not. Who he incidentally also has a degree in exercise science and a coaching background, in addition to being an athlete. He's even said, actually, it's not really that good. So you made this whole thing of when people, you get really defensive about it, when people insult you about it, so well, they just don't know what they're talking about. Have you considered that maybe you don't know what you're talking about on this particular one instance? Because every expert disagrees with you. Whether it's scientific or in the coaching field disagrees with you. You have no anecdote to support it. Only one person has grown traps who does the exercise that we can name, and his traps aren't any bigger than anyone else who can lift the same weight or more than him on the conventional exercises. So his traps aren't actually any bigger. He does like to flex them a lot on camera and do the close-ups. He has fairly narrow shoulders, so that makes them look a little bigger, but they're not like the biggest traps on YouTube. They're not, when he was next to Omar and you saw them side by side, they're not any bigger than Omar's. He didn't do any of that stuff. Then we come to the fact that they destroy gym equipment. So even if it was just a useless exercise and it's like there's no harm in promoting it, it destroys equipment. All right, I've gone into gyms and seen bars that were bent and actually talked to owners and say, yeah, the bars were actually bent because of this trend with the above-the-knee rack pull. Someone bent and ruined one of my bars. All right, it destroys gym equipment. So not only is it a useless exercise and really a bad exercise in terms of programming, it actually damages barbells. You know what? I love barbells. I love weight training. I don't like to see innocent barbells be destroyed due to ignorant ass exercises. What you are doing is promoting an exercise that not only doesn't work, you're actually destroying gym equipment all over the world by giving this advice. You're destroying barbells. You're destroying barbells, and that's fine. If you want to buy your own barbells and ruin them, that's your business. I'm not going to ruin my barbells doing it because I would need over 1,000 pounds to get to a 5-rep max on this exercise, I would need over 1,000 pounds. I would destroy my equipment because my rack is only rated to 1,000 pounds. My barbells are only rated to 1,000 pounds. That's what I would have to reach a 5-rep max, because you can double whatever you deadlift. And I can do 500 pounds for sets of 5. So I would need 1,000 plus pounds to even do this exercise. Well, I'm not destroying my equipment for something that doesn't work. And that's kind of come back to the point. You want to say, well, the scientific people are wrong. The people talking about the biomechanics of it are wrong. It works because of strap-on destiny. Well, why the hell isn't it working for you, Scott? I mean, if you're going to pimp this exercise as being the ultimate exercise, and for traps, and that you've been doing it for over a year, you've been pimping it for a year, you still don't have traps. Maybe you should go just get stronger at your overhead press, work on your rows, work on your deadlift. Get your deadlift up to 500 pounds for a couple reps. Get your overhead press to 200 pounds. Get your shrugs up to 315, 365 for reps, right? If your traps are that big of a deal, do some shrugs. But get strong at them. 225, I mean, come on. Size does equal strength. But it's a terrible exercise, and you're damaging gym equipment by promoting it. And no, I'm not going to stay quiet about it. You might say a lot of things that are good and a lot of things that I agree with. This is a horrifically bad, dangerous, and destructive and irresponsible piece of advice. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.